All right. Okay, so let's move into that period. That's the third period, which is the age of immigrants and growth. So in 1815, you have sort of the start
Bring
of
your huddled masses.
right. Yeah. In fact, I have it on here. I think this is
Bring
the
us your Catholics.
yeah, the Statue of Liberty. There's this poem that is on a plaque there. It says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuge of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, the tempest tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." Okay, so this is supposed to be this opportunity
I got
for,
goosebumps.
I know, right? For people all over the world who are suffering in different places to be able to come to America and make a new life for themselves, right? So this is something that we sort of prided ourselves on as Americans. Again, the melting pot, like people from all over being able to be a part of our country. So from 1815 to 1900, the Catholic Church sees exponential growth because where are all these immigrants coming from?
Italy, Ireland, uh,
Germany.
Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the German coast. In Louisiana, we have the Côte des Allemands. The Des Allemands, the lake, is actually of the Germans.
Mm-hmm.
Germany, where else? Some
Eastern
Poland.
Europe, Poland.
Poland.
So let's see, Irish immigrants from 1830 to 1860, the Catholic population, so there was a wave of Irish immigrants, okay, all coming over during that time period. The Catholic population went from 500,000 to 3,100,000 just in that period of 30 years. So from 500,000 to over 3 million. So
That's
it's a
when my
huge,
people came over,
yeah, so a huge growth.
because they
Then
weren't actually found in Ellis Islands, because they came before Ellis Island. Ellis Island didn't start till the early 1900s, late 1800s, and so my people came over in New York before that, and then made it down to New Orleans.
the Doyles.
This class is about me and my family. Okay, get it straight,
I mean,
Miss
clearly.
Grace.
All right. German immigrants. So Germans from 1860 to 1890, the Catholic population triples in size while the national population only doubles. So here's the national population and then the Catholic population is tripling, right? And so there's still not more Catholics than everybody else in America, but it's like catching up, right?
Yeah, I
So
mean, the national population is like me, and the Catholic population is like Usain Bolt chasing me down.
yeah, eventually passing up at least any other religious group, but not the population in general. Okay, then
And
you
eating
have
chicken nuggets, but not on Fridays in Lent.
oh my goodness. Then you have the Italian and Eastern European immigrants, a wave of them from 1890 to 1920. At that point, more than 2 million Catholics immigrated to the US in the first decade of the 20th century. So by 1890, 4/5 of everyone in greater New York City were immigrants or children of immigrants. And so this time was just a huge exponential growth. Immigrants in general, not all of them are Catholic, but a lot of them are because they're coming from more Catholic countries, right? So our country in 1776, we start with mostly English immigrants, right? So these people coming over from England who are not majority Catholic, right? So that's the founding of the country. But later on, with these waves of immigrants from other places, you have all sorts of Catholics. Okay,
And this
so
is actually why New York and New Orleans tend to have the similar accent. And any
mhm,
area that had a lot of Italian, German, and Irish immigrants, because, well, they each speak different languages, and so the shared language is going to be English. So
mhm,
didn't choose one of them. So
mhm,
it actually is this amalgamation, that Yiddish accent or that
mhm.
New York accent, kind of like that.
Yeah.
That's an amalgamation, linguists think, of these three different accents of Italian, Irish, and German.
So it's funny because growing up in Alabama, like I said, I wasn't aware of all the different things, cultural things about Louisiana. And I had a friend whose mom was from New Orleans and she had that Yat accent. And when I first heard her speak, the first several times I heard her speak, I legitimately thought she was from New York. And I asked him, like, is she from New York? And he's like, no, she's from New Orleans. And I was like, what do you mean she's from New Orleans? She sounds like she's from New York. But then when I moved here and I started talking to people from New Orleans, I was like, oh, wow, it's a very similar accent. So yeah. Then so this as the immigrants are coming in, so many of them from these foreign countries speaking different languages, also you have many of them Catholic coming into, I guess, historically a more Protestant country. There was a lot of prejudice that was going on. So you want to talk a little bit about that prejudice towards immigrants?
Well, if you think this is not new, let's we can even go back to scripture. Think of Israel and Egypt, right? So Israel eventually with Jacob and his sons, they go to Egypt, and at some point the Egyptians feel threatened because, oh, they're going to take our way of life, they're going to change things. It's human nature to be scared, and this isn't a good part of human nature, but to be scared and sometimes even violently defend the status quo of what has it been and what does it look like and what does our culture look like, and to reject change and reject amalgamation of culture. And so we see that throughout history, and it's no different for the United States, right? So
Mm.
um, especially because it was happening so exponentially, there's so many
Yeah,
immigrants
so
coming in.
quickly. Yeah. So there's, you have this culture that's built up until this point where people are speaking English. They're mostly from the same ancestry, like ethnicity and things like that. And so now all of a sudden you have these people who are speaking different languages. They have different social and religious customs. A lot of them are Catholic. A lot of them are extremely poor. They're coming from places where they're sort of destitute, and so they're coming to America for a better life. And so there were a lot of unskilled laborers that were willing to compete for low wages. So this is something that was, I guess, angering some of the people who had been here before. So there's just this
No, that doesn't happen
yeah,
nowadays.
so I mean, you even
No,
see some of this prejudice taking place today. Your face is so ridiculous. I can't take you seriously.
people don't think this way.
You hear people talk about this all the time. Okay, so there's this prejudice
Listen,
that still pervades, like whenever we are or we're faced with people who are different than us, people that we're not used to their culture, we're not used to their language or the way that they live their life. We start to be kind of suspicious, and we're kind of protective of our own way of life, and we kind of start to see them as a threat, even though that isn't necessary, right? But that's just something that we do sometimes. And so
Grace, you like muffaladas?
your muffaladas,
Mhm.
I'm like
Sandwich?
kind of I could take or leave a
You like
muffalata, to be
spaghetti?
honest. I do love spaghetti.
Do you like, kielbasa sausage?
Yes, but I'm also Polish, so
Do you like Mardi Gras?
I love Mardi Gras.
Do you like other things that immigrants have brought to us?
I do, and you guys
Do you
do
love your
too.
faith?
Yes. Okay. So yeah, so I mean this is something that, and it's really ironic, right? Because you have the original English immigrants, they were immigrants, right? That came to America. Like their ancestors were not from here either. Really, the only true natives, right, are Native American people. But yet there's this sort of attitude of like, we were here first, so like all you other people are taking our jobs, or you're doing whatever. But it's like, well, we're a nation of immigrants, right? Like this is all of us. Like
Have
none of
you
us are
have you
unique or
seen,
different.
Forrest Gump? You know that scene on Forrest Gump where Forrest gets on the school bus
It's been a
and all the people are
really
like,
long time.
"Seats taken." That's what it made me think of. Like, no one would
Yeah.
let him sit by him,
Yeah.
except for Jenny,
So
and then she spends decades. Never mind.
okay. So basically there's this idea that we've been talking about is called nativism. So it's basically the belief that America should be preserved for the quote unquote native born Americans, which again is ironic, right? Because when they said this, they were talking about the Anglo-Saxon Protestants, right, who are coming over. But again, ironically, it's really the Native Americans, the American Indians, right, who are truly the native born Americans, and yet they're kicked out of their homes by people who come over, right? So there's just irony abounds. Okay, so just a couple of instances of this prejudice that's going on with Catholics is you have just fear and suspicion spread. It sparks violence towards Catholic immigrants specifically. So there was a mob that burned an Ursuline convent in Boston. There was a whole Irish neighborhood that was burned. There was a publication of this thing called the Awful Discourses, which was like a unfactual, just sort of made up slandering of Catholic convents. There was also a political party called the Know Nothings. Have you heard of the Know Nothings?
No, I don't know of them.
So this party questioned the patriotism of Catholics. So we mentioned that before. They started riots, they fired shots, they fixed elections, and they harassed convents. Listen, anybody who's harassing
Who's harassing
nuns,
convents?
like, come on. You know, it's like the French Revolution all over again. Um,
No,
so
not quite.
not quite.
They didn't
But
behead the nuns.
yeah, true. But yeah, so there's all sorts of things going on. And here's a quote from President Lincoln. He said, when the know nothings get control, it will read, all men are created equal except Negroes and foreigners and Catholics. When it comes to this, I should prefer immigrating to some country where they make no pretense of loving liberty. So
Oh,
basically,
dang.
yeah, so Lincoln's basically saying, hey, know nothings. Like, you guys literally know nothing. You don't know what you're talking about. You call yourselves Americans, you call yourselves patriots and supporters of liberty, but you're really not, because you're being prejudiced towards people who are not like you. Right. And so he's like, the whole point of America is to be welcoming to all sorts of different people, to have this melting pot, right? For everybody to have a chance for a better life from wherever they're coming from. And yet you are prejudiced against all of these different groups of people that he lists. So anyways, all right, so then you have the Civil War. Okay, so the Civil War comes along, and here's another opportunity to kind of band together, I guess, Catholics and non-Catholics fighting on different sides, but also both like sides together, right? So um, even though the Catholic Church has always very clearly denounced slavery, right? We mentioned this before. Whenever the slave trade first begins, that you have popes writing very clearly against slavery. We talked about this from your last few chapters. Um, Unfortunately, here's an example of something that is popular in American culture at the time, slavery,
Mm-hmm.
that is not good, right? But there's even Catholics who are accepting it because they're allowing their American sensibilities to take over their understanding of their faith. And so you have Catholics in America, not all of them, but some of them, who are supporting slavery, who are owning slaves and doing things like that. And even though the church has taught, like, hey, this isn't okay, right? But they're like, oh, they have their different reasonings for it and stuff. But that's not right. Okay, so that's a temptation that we always have, is to kind of go along with what the culture is saying or what's popular or accepted in the culture, when our faith tells us that it's immoral and that it's wrong.
Yep.
Okay, so a couple of like a negative thing and a positive thing about Catholics in the Civil War. So the negative thing is that Catholics themselves were divided in the Civil War, like I mentioned. So you had some that were fighting on one side, some that were fighting on the other. Um, Positively, though, you had priests serving as chaplains and nuns heroically ministering to the wounded on both sides, right? So they're sort of, I guess, nonpartisan in the Civil War, but they're just trying to serve people wherever they're found, wherever they're wounded, wherever they're suffering, trying to provide for their needs. And so that did a lot, actually, to counteract the nativist slander that Catholics were somehow unpatriotic, because here's these priests and these nuns who are giving everything that they are in the service to those who are suffering because of the war. And so that actually was a good thing, or a positive thing, I guess, for the Catholic image in America. Okay. Um, let's see. As time goes on, you have public schools becoming exceedingly anti-Catholic. You have history textbooks that ridicule the church and the Pope. You have teachers requiring students to sing only Protestant hymns, read from Protestant Bibles, never Catholic ones. Not that it's that much different, right? But there's a couple of differences there. But the point is that they were pointedly not allowing Catholic religion to be a part of this public system. It's kind of funny, though,
Oh,
even just thinking about faith at all in public schools, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's definitely a thing from the past. But well, that's not true in Louisiana. Because
Yeah.
St. James, the Catholic high school is named after a Supreme Court Justice E.D. White, and
Mm.
the public school is named after St. James.
Oh, the
And then
irony.
they would bus the kids to like on during Lent. They would bus the kids to right after school. All the Catholics had to go to the church, and this was up until like the 50s,
Wow.
the 1950s. They'd bus the kids to the church for catechism and the Stations of the Cross on Fridays during Lent. Isn't that crazy? Actually,
Yeah.
the priests would go teach at St. James High School for Catholics. They'd go to a
No
separate
way.
classroom and teach a class for CCD.
Wow. Dang. I didn't know that. Huh.
Hmm.
Um, all right. So, because of this sort of prejudice that is still coming up through the public education system, you have the founding of what we call parochial schools or parish schools. So, you have schools like, for example, in Baton Rouge, you have schools like St. George and St. Thomas More and St. John Vianney, right? And there's all these different schools that are attached to a parish and run specifically by that parish. And so this was modeled on the schools of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. So we talked about her before. She had worked with Bishop John Carroll in the very beginning in Baltimore, and she had established basically what became the Catholic school system in America. But during the time of immigrants, it really starts to explode because you have a lot more Catholics these various immigrant parishes. All right, so those schools helped to bring immigrants into mainstream Catholic life. So they weren't just teaching the Catholic faith, obviously, they were also teaching American like civics and politics and history and all these different things that kind of helped these foreign immigrants meld into the American culture and kind of become a part of the country. So they were helpful in that way. Um, the Baltimore Catechism was published, which we've talked about catechisms before, but this was a local catechism that was specifically, I mean, it was universal church teachings, but it was specifically written for Catholics in America.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, the immigrant parishes really helped to build a lot of Catholic identity in America. So there's a lot of immigrant parishes or historically immigrant parishes in New Orleans. Like when we go on the 9 church walk on Good Friday, you see a lot of those old churches where like this was the Irish church and across the street was the German church and then down the road is the Italian church, right? And they had a lot of them clergy from various religious orders from those countries that would come over and be able to say mass and preach their homilies and things like that in that native language of those people. So they ended up kind of like establishing these cultures, even just like across the street from each other, where they're both Catholic, but like one priest speaks German and the other one speaks English, you know, or
Which is
speaks.
cool because then you get 2 feast days. You have the Irish and then
You
the
can go to
German. You get
all
St.
of the
Patrick's Day,
festivals, right?
all the
Yeah.
festivals every day.
Yeah. All right. So let's see here. Let's we're going next. All right, so charitable organizations and parishes. There's a lot of things that begin to exist, things that we don't really think about that are established really by Catholic parishes or by the Catholic Church, particularly when it comes to charity for support of various hospitals and ways of caring for the sick and the elderly and all of that. So in these times you have people depending on church sponsored charity because there is no social security or anything like that at the time. So orphanages, hospitals, homes for the aged. You have the Society of St. Vincent de Paul that is brought to America. You have the Knights of Columbus. You have just religious sisters in general making a huge impact on the infrastructure of the church in America. So they serve the poor, they serve minorities that aren't being served by the public system as well. You have famous women saints like Saint Frances Cabrini, who was an Italian immigrant. You have Catherine Drexel, who founded Xavier University in New
Native American,
Orleans. She
Native
served.
American, and African American ministry.
You have Rose Philippine Duquesne, right? So like Duquesne University. So there's a lot of these religious sisters who are making a huge impact on America. A lot of these women religious founding institutions and education and all this stuff. Then clerical leadership. What's interesting about clerical leadership is that you have a heavy uh, influence of the Irish in clerical leadership. And one of the reasons for that is because of their language, right? At that point in history, the Irish immigrants who were coming over already spoke English, right? So they were more easily able to kind of
I mean,
meld
kind of.
into, huh?
They kind of spoke English. No, I'm joking. It's just a joke about Irish accents and
Oh,
your ability to
I was
understand
like,
them.
they spoke English.
No, no,
Okay.
no. It's a joke about their
I
accent.
gotcha. Yeah. So you had Cardinal Gibbons of Baltimore that we talked about, right? Baltimore Catechism. He established various holy days of obligation for America. He founded Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. The Knights of Labor. You mentioned Archbishop John Hughes of New York, Dagger John. He was really famous for sticking up for Catholics in the midst of prejudice. He founded Fordham University, which is formerly St. John's College, and also was instrumental in founding and building St. Patrick's Cathedral, the famous
Ooh,
cathedral in New York
so good.
City. Yeah. All right. So during this time, though, in the late 1800s, there were a lot of people talking about this whole tension of being Catholic and being American. So, like, how do these things fit together? And Pope Leo the 13th famously condemned this heresy that he dubbed Americanism. Do you know anything about Americanism and Leo the 13th?
Not particularly with Leo the 13th. Other than, well, I'll say this: Pope Leo the 13th was the Pope at the time of the First Vatican Council,
Mm-mm.
and no,
Pius the Ninth. He was right after.
I'm a doofus.
You're close. He was right after.
Yeah, late 1800s.
Mhm.
Okay, well then never mind. I don't have anything to say.
So,
Well, I mean, Americanism is putting America, like putting America and her ideals, even if they're contradictory to the faith, before your faith.
right.
And
So,
and like I get to vote on what's right and wrong because look, I get to vote on my senator, I get to vote on the president, so I should get to vote on what I think Catholic belief is.
yeah. So this idea of American democracy, but applied to the faith, which doesn't really work that way. So, Americanism to Leo was the idea that American Catholics would put their American political allegiance and ideology before their Catholic faith, and thus reject tenets of the Catholic faith whenever they contradicted American ideals. Okay. So now there were a lot of people, and there are a lot of people today who do this, right? But the argument among American clergy and bishops and people like that was that there was never an official position of the church or the leaders of the church in America that this should actually be okay. But this was sort of a pervading, like, what's the word? Like the atmosphere was sort of like that, and the way that people were acting was sort of like that. But there was never this official teaching from like local bishops or clergy that like this is the way that we ought to live. It was just that people were living that way.
So like
Um,
nobody, which it makes it a little different because,
mm,
Arianism came from Arius,
who was a
you
bishop,
know, like
right?
Marcianism came from Marcian, like Americanism didn't come from Americo Vespucci, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and
It
it didn't
wasn't like
come
this.
And it didn't come from the Catholic bishops in America as an official teaching. So people like Arius are declaring, this is what I believe to be true, that is contrary to the Catholic faith. But there was not this declaration of this American heresy, this Americanism. And so a lot of people ended up calling it the phantom heresy because it's a heresy that's condemned by Leo the 13th as a pope. But people would argue like, hey, it actually wasn't an official heresy. It was just a way that people were acting that was wrong. So there's sort of an
Just
argument
a sin.
about that. Sorry.
It's just a sin.
Oh yeah, just sin. That's all. Yeah. So basically, yeah, it's even though it wasn't an official heresy, it still is a problem, right? And we see this all the time. We've been talking about that. And so I think that it was probably good that Leo at least addressed it and was kind of giving the church's official position on it, even if it wasn't an official heresy to be combated. Okay.
True, true.
All right. Let's see
How much
here.
longer do you want? What do you want this to be? Just get through the info.
Yeah, we'll just do it and then I can cut it up. So
Okay, hold on. Let me see something. Okay, yeah, we're good.
we're good.
Yeah,
All right.
I got
Let's
till
see.
3. We got like 2 more hours. Let's just roll.
I
Let's
don't
do
have
it.
that much left. All right. Um, Okay, so I want to talk quickly about patriotism. So, the whole idea of patriotism in America, like what does it mean to be an American Catholic, but also to be a patriot? American Catholics historically have been pretty zealous for their country. This might possibly have been stemming from accusations to the contrary, like people saying like, "Oh, you Catholics, you papists, like you're monarchists, you're not really true Americans, you don't support democracy, blah blah blah." But then American Catholics being frustrated by that and be like, "No, that's not what I believe," and then kind of being very patriotic to kind of prove themselves, right, to the rest
You don't
of
see my
the
American
nation.
flag swimsuit?
Yeah, I got American flags on everything. And so basically, Catholics historically have been pretty patriotic when it comes to America. But again, you have the temptation of going too far, right? Putting your country before your faith, which is not what we're meant to do. And so I just want to kind of talk about like, what does it mean to be truly patriotic in
Well, I
America as a
think
Catholic?
to truly understand, correctly understand what patriotism ought to be, its essence, right? Because there's a lot of distortions. Just like anything in the world, there's a lot of distortions uh, of patriotism, right? And to truly correctly understand it, you have to truly correctly understand what love is, right? Because patriotism is a love of your country or your
Mhm,
fatherland. If you pater is the root word for patriotism, so it's your fatherland
mhm,
and love of where you were from,
mhm,
right? Of your place, of your land.
mhm,
Now, if love is understood by affirming everything uh, the object or the subject does or decides or says. If love means an emotion towards a particular person or place, well, then patriotism can be distorted, right? But that's not what true love is.
mhm.
Love is desiring the good for the other, whether that's a person or a country or an organization, right? A proper love of the Catholic Church isn't an affirmation of everything a member of the Catholic Church does. That's a
Right,
distortion.
right.
That's not true love of the church. True love of the church actually calls the church to holiness and correction and purification. And the same goes for a patriotism, American patriotism. If you're a true patriot, you don't just affirm everything our country decides to do or say, and much less members of the government. No, we actually, a true patriotism, a true love of your country calls your country to purification and to truth and to the common good.
Right. So
That's the
patriotism
best thing I ever said on your. I
was
could
on
pee.
the
Okay,
fly. Y'all should know that was on the fly.
okay,
Uh,
bye.
no, don't leave.
I'm
Oh
just
my goodness. Okay, so patriotism doesn't mean supporting every decision, policy, or even war that a government makes, no matter what. But it means loving your country and your countrymen and working to make it the best it can be, right? Because you care about the people that you live with, you care about the country that you're from, and you want to make it the best that it can possibly be. But you don't necessarily believe that it is perfect, right? So we talked about super nationalism before, which was a cause of a lot of like the world wars.
mhm.
That's sort of like this overzealous, like my country and nothing else, like only our country is the best. Everybody else is terrible, whatever else. And so that's not good either. But it's this love that sees the flaws in your own country, but desires to correct them, desires to make it the best that it can possibly be. Okay. So, what that means is that sometimes we have to oppose certain actions or statements by leaders, even leaders that we tend to agree with on other things that they do or say, if we really care about what's best for our country. And then on the flip side, that means supporting good decisions made by those leaders who other decisions by them we may not typically agree with, but maybe they do something right that we should actually acknowledge that, and be able to support that, because again, it's not about who are we supporting, but it's about how do we make our country the best that it can be. All right. Let's talk about some more, I guess, some more prejudice that Catholics experience, particularly in the 1900s. So, kind of moving into more present day. You have a couple of things. Have you ever heard of the American Protective Association?
Protective?
Hmm.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it restricted Catholic immigration. It made English a prerequisite for citizenship, which made it difficult for a lot of non-English speaking immigrants to come over. And it also removed Catholics from teaching in public schools or holding public office for a time. So at least those were their goals, right? That's what they wanted to accomplish, and they didn't completely accomplish those things, but it was just this group that was kind of anti-Catholic in that way.
It's just
Um,
another xenophobic group.
right. So probably
Keep
all of you.
talking. I just have to change up my light real quick because my battery's about to die. Bye.
Okay.
Keep talking. Go, go, go.
Okay, I'm going. All right. So you guys have probably heard of the Ku Klux Klan before, right? Who's very famous for being super bigoted towards African Americans, but also they were bigoted towards Catholics and towards Jews. So it wasn't just African Americans, but also Catholics. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" It's one of my favorite movies. It's completely ridiculous, but it is a movie where in there's a scene with the Ku Klux Klan, and the kind of main guy that is like, I guess, preaching like on the behalf of the Ku Klux Klan is saying something. He's like listing all the people that are their enemies, and one thing that he says is papists, and so that's a sort of a derogatory term for Catholics at the time. So we were talking about. We're talking about the Ku Klux Klan and how they weren't only
Crap.
anti-African American, but they were also anti-Catholic and anti-Jewish. And so there were Catholics and Jews that were persecuted as well by them. Um, there was a Catholic presidential candidate named Al Smith. Have you heard of him?
I have, but I didn't make that connection in my head.
Yeah, so he was basically on the track to run for president, and he was running for president. But there was a whole anti-Catholic, like kind of smear campaign against him, which caused him to significantly lose the election. So there was a false belief that if he won, the Pope would take up residence in the White House and Protestants would lose their citizenship. So it sounds ridiculous, and it was ridiculous, but people believed it.
Are
And
you
so they
serious?
yeah, and so they didn't vote for him, and so that he
When was
wasn't
this?
able to. This was, I think, in the early 1900s. I can't remember exactly when, maybe like the 30s. But then it wasn't until JFK, right, that we actually had a Catholic president, and JFK is really the only Catholic president that we've ever had.
He is the only.
Yeah. But even he had to
Until George
overcome.
W. converts, which I'm really praying for.
Okay, that's random.
Just because I want him
Uh,
to be a lector at mass. I mean, can you imagine him reading
reading.
Genesis in the Easter Vigil?
I
It'd
would
be
do it. I would do an impression, but I would be terrible, so I won't. Uh, all right, yes, but
amazing.
even JFK
In the
had
book
to.
of Genesis.
Oh my gosh, even JFK had to overcome prejudice in order to be elected. And he was only elected by a very small margin. I don't know if you knew that. Um,
Yeah, I knew that, and I know that his his social views on on helping the poor and things like that, and even civil rights at the time was a big deal. It's the early '60s. His social views were very much informed by his Catholic faith, right? The equality of all people
mhm.
against. Oh man,
Your light went out.
okay, I'll just be in the dark. Um, but he also wasn't. I think there were some things that he agreed on, and he kind of went with the world on,
Hmm.
um, and
Definitely,
didn't
yeah.
go to church. So
Even in his personal life.
yeah,
Yeah. So so he wasn't the perfect Catholic, right? He wasn't the ideal Catholic, but at the same time, this was the only Catholic that we've ever even had in office, and a lot of that having to do with prejudice. So that's the point. Um, all right. So let's see. Uh Here's a trivia question. The church in America, the Catholic Church in America, was considered missionary territory until what year? So like foreign missions, right? So you have Rome, right? And you have
the
missionaries from all over the
entire
world.
thing,
Yeah,
because
being
there's definitely
sent out.
still.
There's still missionary dioceses, right? But the whole country itself was considered missionary territory until what year?
I would say 1978.
Overshot a bit, but it was 1908.
Oh,
1908.
that makes
So
sense.
yeah, but it was heavily supported by mission aid societies from across the world until the early 1920s. So the church in America couldn't even really support itself until later in the 1900s. Um,
And what really the particular measurement of whether you're a missionary place, a mission is, do you have vocations to support your own churches?
Yeah, and we largely didn't, right? We had waves of, and we still do have waves of priests, missionary priests who come to us from different countries. There's a huge wave of Irish priests, right, coming over specifically to minister to the American church. And then now, today we see a lot of Indian priests and African priests that are coming over to support our shortage of priestly vocations. Um, all right, let's see. By 2003, over 6,500 priests, brothers, and lay missionaries in foreign missions abroad. So that means coming from America to foreign missions. So that has sort of exploded since then, but still not able to sustain locally as much as we can. Maryknoll and Jesuits are the largest missionary societies in America. And this is interesting. American Catholic laity give more money to missions, like foreign missions, than any other national group, which is really interesting.
Really?
hmm let's see. A couple of other important things. Oh, here's a New Orleans thing. Talking about just social justice in America in the 1900s, especially, and into
Talking about
today.
Rummel?
Yeah, Rummel. So this is racial justice. So again, you have many Americans, including some Catholics, unfortunately, who are not treating people equally according to the Catholic faith, right? And so, especially during the Civil Rights Movement, you had a lot of Catholics who were standing up in support of equal rights, but then you also had Catholics who were not, right? Which is a problem. Um, and so there were a couple of important things going on. One of which happens in New Orleans with Rummel. So do you know kind of what Rummel is famous for?
Well, I know that he desegregated the Catholic schools
Mm-hmm.
before the national, uh, I guess, state schools did, a national and the public schools, and then he also excommunicated either one person or a bunch of people for racism.
Right. So he was really strongly in support of equal rights, of desegregation. He wanted Catholics to be worshiping together, right, and not to be divided by their race, because again, right, being Catholic, it means universal, right? Like everybody is on equal ground, and so he was a sort of forerunner of desegregation in our country, like at least when it came to religious leaders, before the ruling of what was it, the Brown versus the Board of Education. Um,
Yes.
so he was in even before that. So kind of a cool local hero in the Catholic Church. All right. Um, oh, he
Roll
also
Rumble Raiders, roll red and blue, roll Rumble Raiders. They have the same fight
is
song
that
as LSU. That's
oh
Rummel's fight
is
song.
that where your dad went? Did your dad go to
Yeah,
Rummel? Yeah.
yeah.
Uh yeah. Okay, so then just in general, like political and social action in America, you have at times when Catholics, priests will get a little too involved in politics and end up regarding certain church teachings because of whatever thing that they're fighting for. But then other people you have who are really trying to balance the church's vision of social justice as well as the tenets of the Catholic faith. And one really interesting person is Dorothy Day. So she's a servant of God, which means that her cause for canonization has been open, but she's not been officially declared a saint or blessed yet. And she and this man named Peter Morin founded the Catholic Worker Movement. So they were in New York, and their whole purpose was to serve the poorest of the poor in New York City. So they wanted to give people the opportunity to have a better place to live, to work, to provide for them. And so they founded these houses of hospitality, and they started a newspaper that would talk about social justice issues. Um, I think Dorothy Day is a really cool person because she experienced great conversion in her life. So she started out as sort of a communist and then an anarchist. Um, but then she came, and an atheist as well. She came eventually to faith, to Catholic faith. She converted to Catholicism. She even had an abortion before her conversion, but it was actually the birth of her second child that she actually gave birth to, that when she held her in her arms, she said, "My heart like surged with gratitude, and I knew that there had to be something or someone that gave me this great gift because I felt this great gratitude, and nothing, no other person on earth could be like the object of that gratitude, if that makes sense." And so she came in that moment kind of to faith in uh a higher person, right? um and so
Yeah, like who is an atheist thankful for too? Who is
thankful
he thankful
too,
to?
yeah, who are you,
Yeah.
yeah, who are you thankful to? And so so yeah, so she, that was sort of the beginning, I guess, of her journey of becoming Catholic. And eventually she came to full faith, and she became a great advocate of the pro-life movement, which for us today, sometimes we tend to only think about anti-abortion, which she definitely was, and very personally so. But also it's caring for the needs of the poor, right? It's caring for the needs of the destitute. That's also pro-life. And so I think she's a really cool, like, pro-life almost saint, because she kind of lived out both, what we tend to see in America today is both sides of the pro-life movement. Okay. Um, there was also at the time the Catholic family movement, which, and other movements like it, that were trying to remind lay people of our vocation in the church. Like, we have a role to play, we have leadership that we can take in the church in different ways, in order to live out the gospel and to spread the gospel to the rest of our society. And so there's sort of an emphasis, and especially moving up through Vatican II, which we are talking about before, this emphasis on the laity, just like everyday Catholics rediscovering our mission and what our role is in the church. Okay. There's what is called the golden years of Catholicism in America. Have you heard about this?
Oh, I don't. I've heard of golden years. It's probably not exactly true. It's probably a misnomer,
No.
huh?
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Like
It
what,
doesn't
the
mean,
1950s,
yeah.
post World War II,
Hmm.
population baby boomer explosion, move into the suburbs, build in huge ugly churches,
Hmm.
have a lot of
So,
Catholics that actually gained more money, so they
right.
can put more. So post World War II, you have the fruit of all the immigration, but now they're not as poor because of just progress, and less people in the United States are
Hmm.
poor, so they have more money to put back into the church. And there's like just a lot, the age dynamic, there's a lot of young people, there's a lot of youth, there's a lot of vigor in the church. The seminaries are absolutely packed.
Right. So this is the period from the 1940s to the 1960s in America. So I'm just going to rattle off a few things that are happening in sort of Catholic America at this time. First of all, you have Venerable Fulton Sheen. Okay, so Fulton Sheen is a famous. No, is he's being beatified, right? Is that the latest?
Well, he it's held up, but yes, eventually, most
Okay.
likely.
So he had a TV show that was actually it won an Emmy, and it was called Life is Worth Living, and literally he was this bishop. He eventually was a cardinal, right? Um, was he a
No,
cardinal or no? No, he was just an
no.
archbishop.
Hmm.
So he was in his whole like archbishop garb, right? And he would stand up with a blackboard behind him and he would basically teach the faith, but he was super funny, he was very witty, extremely intelligent,
So
and he
good,
had
so
a
good at it.
prime time TV spot. You guys can look up videos of him on YouTube. Archbishop Fulton Sheen, Life is Worth Living was the name of his TV show, and again, it was so popular, it won an Emmy. People from all walks of life, different religions even, listened to him on primetime TV. So that was during this time period. You also had John F. Kennedy as president during this time period. You had American John Courtney Murray, a Jesuit who helped to draft the Vatican II Declaration on Religious Freedom, which we've mentioned before, with John Paul II as the co-author. So you have somebody from a country that's oppressed and doesn't have access to religious freedom by the Nazis and then the communists, right? And then you have somebody from America, John Courtney Murray, who is experiencing the sort of fullness of religious freedom. And so they have these interesting perspectives to write that document. Also, this is just an interesting fact. You had the church very well represented in a positive light in media, in movies and media. So I just want to list out for
Bells
you.
of St. Mary's.
Yeah, so I'm gonna list out for you some Oscar winners and nominees, all from this time period that had Christian and Catholic themes that were very like, I guess they were positive, right? So today you might see something that is more negative about the Catholic Church in films, but back then you had all these positive ones. So the Song of Bernadette, which some of you watched for your project, that was 1943 Oscar. Going My Way in 1944 and The Bells of St. Mary's in 1945. Both of those were Bing Crosby playing a priest, Father O'Malley, in various cities in the United States. You had Quo Vadis in 1951, which is the story of Peter, I believe.
Yeah, Peter leaving
Um,
Rome and Jesus seeing him and saying, "Turn around, dude."
you have The Quiet Man in 1952 with John Wayne and
Who's a yeah.
Maureen O'Hara.
Wow, so good.
You have The Robe in 1953, which I think is that the story of right
Nope.
after the resurrection? I think it is.
Oh, I don't know about that.
The Ten Commandments in 1956. You
Wow.
have Ben-Hur in 1959, The Nun's Story in 1959, The Sound of Music in 1965, and A Man for All Seasons, which some other of you guys watched about St. Thomas More in 1966, Oscar winner. So all of those
Good.
were either winners or nominees during that sort of golden age time period, which is something that we definitely don't see a lot of today in the media. All right, so then you have the 1960s, which we sort of talked about already. This was kind of full swing in America, a lot of social and political upheaval. You have the civil rights movement, you have the Vietnam War, you have the sexual revolution, you have tons of assassinations of political leaders, right? So you have MLK, you have RFK, you have JFK. In the 60s, you have Vatican II. You have a sharp decline in vocations to priesthood and religious life, or at least people answering the call. People are very confused in the wake of the council. They don't really know what the church is trying to do. Today we have sort of hindsight and a little bit clearer of a view, but back then it was mass chaos whenever it first happened. And so that was affecting the American church a lot. Um, More recently, we have sex abuse scandals, right? So really difficult things going on in the American church. So just kind of contrast a lot of those films from the 1940s to the 1960s with the 1915 Oscar winner, which was Spotlight, right? Which was the movie about the
So
sex abuse
2015.
crisis. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was about to say, I was literally thinking that as you were saying, okay, we have these Oscar winners, and then you
Mm-hmm.
have Doubt, which is about
Mm-hmm.
the sex abuse crisis. You
Mm-hmm.
have Spotlight, which is also about that, and it's an Oscar winner, and I think it's a really good movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's unimportant to make the connection that what Spotlight is putting a spotlight on is the real problems that started during the golden age
Right.
of the church, quote
So,
unquote.
right. So on the surface, you have this sort of sunny, happy view, but on what's going on beneath in a lot of places is not good things, right? That start to come to light after that. And so I think it's just a good lesson to know that what's going on the surface isn't always what's going on underneath. And so it's important for us to look deeper than just the surface level of things, to not also dub a certain age of history or a certain age of the church as a golden age, because really there's good, bad, and ugly in every era of the church. And we talked about this a lot this year, that we're human beings. We're full of sin, right? And there's never going to be a perfection of the church on earth until the end of time when the Lord brings everything to completion, right? But we're called to work for that. We're called to strive for personal holiness, right? And to encourage those around us, but that there's really no way to create a perfect society while we are still sinners in need of God's mercy and in need of his grace. And so yeah, I think it's an important lesson. There's a lot of people who are sort of tempted to talk about certain eras of history as like, oh, those were the good old days, right? But that's sort of a what's the word? Like it's a false
Well,
idea.
the failures of the good old days is what brings you the struggles of today,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Usually
Yeah.
that's the case.
Yeah.
The inability of the church to to address the sexual revolution, the anti-authoritarianism of the 60s and 70s. So I think there's a lot of stuff we can learn, like you said.
Yeah. All right. Just a couple of good things or hopeful things about the church today. It is true that we have more than 70,000 annually converting to Catholicism in America. There's definitely a decline, I guess, in numbers in general, but there are still a lot of people that are discovering the faith or rediscovering the faith and coming to faith in America. You have, we mentioned this before, but a lot of misunderstandings that were surrounding the immediate wake of Vatican II have been
Mhm.
corrected and have been kind of pushed in a better direction. We're still kind of trying to work that out and implement it, but it's a lot. It's looking up. It's a lot better, I guess, than it was in the past. Um, the pontificate of John Paul II changed the lives of people across the world. And we'll talk about this in our next unit, but specifically Americans. He came to Denver at World Youth Day in 2002, and there was a massive wave of conversion and vocations and people coming to a deeper faith because of the influence and the inspiration of his papacy. Um, and we're also seeing a little bit of an upswing in vocations, right? So vocations to priesthood and religious life, even though our numbers are still below what they need to be, it's kind of an upswing in recent years. Okay. So yeah, I think that's all I got. You have any more comments or thoughts?
No, I love being Catholic. I love being a priest.
Cool.
I'm glad that these kids are still listening, because if
Probably
you're
not.
hearing this, you're still listening. So you, sir or ma'am, are an upstanding individual, and I appreciate you. God
Good.
bless you.
Me too.
May you get a plenary indulgence. If you're still listening, go out to your mailbox, and there's a gift of $1 million. We'll see
Oh
who's
my
listening
gosh.
by how they email you,
Yeah.
because they did get their 1 million.
They might be emailing you. I'll give them your email address so they can harass you.
Boo.
All
Can
right.
I release this as a podcast?
Sure. Bye, kids.